Right. Hi, I'm Mark MacDonald. I'm the Director of Teaching in Maths and Stats in Lancaster University. And I teach a big second year linear algebra module, so 200, 250 students. And this year I tried something new with the Moodle quizzes that I'd like to share with you. So first I'll start with some student feedback. So hopefully you can read this. If not, don't worry about it. So the main thing, so this is comments from the end of module survey, which in my experience, students almost never comment on the Moodle quiz or most assessment aspects of modules. This year, I had lots of comments on the Moodle quiz aspect. They were saying things like they made them understand the material better, filled gaps in knowledge, they got a deeper understanding, they learned a lot from the quiz structure. Which is really great to hear. I was really pleased with the positive comments there, and it was also the highest module feedback that I'd ever received for any module, so that's great. So previously I had Moodle quizzes in this linear algebra module, but they were single attempts, so there was like a single deadline, which they didn't get any feedback till after the deadline. Okay. So the big change this year was that they were given multiple attempts, and there was, and that's what I will describe. So now that I've got your attention with the student feedback, I'll describe what I did. So here is a example question. So this is the same look of question as in previous years as well. This is called a multiple true-false style of question. So that's where kind of on one topic, you have a sequence, in this case, 4 true-false statements. Okay, so there's some literature on this, comparing it in particular to multiple choice quizzes, where you have multiple choices and just there's one correct answer that you have to choose. And the literature is pretty positive on this question style. It's often overlooked, though. So this example, so if you can't read it, it's a question about linear combinations. So they're each just asking things like, is this vector a linear combination of these two vectors, true or false? Okay, but you could also ask a huge range of questions. So I generated these questions using the EAMS package, so as part of the R software, which generated a XML file, which then you can upload into Moodle. So this is a closed question type, which was created. So each of these statements, there's 4 true-false statements, I made several variants. So there's 3 to 6 variants for each of those statements, which the our exams package kind of combined. So it created different questions so that every attempt they get a different selection of questions. Okay. I've since learned that there's a way better way to do this in Stack, so I'll be doing that next year, by the way. So Stack is the way forward for me, but I did this in our exams. And then there's this feedback loop. So after they submit, then what do they get? They get this yellow box, text box, which has feedback is generic. It's the same for all of the variants. And in principle, it gives them enough information to be able to deduce the correct answers, but they're not told the correct answer. So these green ticks and X's, they don't get that until after the deadline. Okay, so all they get is this, it says mark out of 4. So this says 3 out of 4. So they don't know which one they got wrong. So the idea is that they submit their answer, they get their marks, and then they say, I've done something wrong. What is it? They look at the question, they try and figure out which one they did wrong. They look at the feedback, they kind of engage closely with the feedback, they read it closely. Not sure, maybe that gives them enough information. Maybe they say, I don't really understand this part. Let's go back to the notes. Okay, that's the desired behavior. And based on student comments and get some information from the Moodle logs, that seems to be what they did, which is really great because it means that they were engaging with the feedback and with the content. Okay, so that's the main mechanism that that made this work. So let's just recapping some of those points in this design. It's a low stakes assessment. I mean, this is a part of the coursework. Each quiz counted for 1% of their overall mark. And the main deterrent, so the problem with multiple attempts is there are ways to game the system, and you want to avoid students gaming the system and somehow inflating their marks artificially when they don't understand the content. So the random variance is one deterrent. Another one is that they can't just do it over and over again and like exhaust the question bank and deduce all the correct answers, because there's an enforced 10-minute delay between their submissions. Okay, so even if they want to make 6 different attempts, that's going to take them an hour. And at some point, the student has to make this calculation in their head. Am I going to spend time waiting 10 minutes, or should I just learn the material? So hopefully that calculation means that they have been learning the material correctly, because they're given this feedback that they can read, and they have been reading, which is great. Okay, so that is the, and I'll just make a point about the pedagogical justification for true-false questions. I mean, firstly, there's a huge flexibility, of course, in true-false questions, but being able to evaluate a lot, you know, in sequence, a ton of true-false questions is actually a valuable skill for mathematics. I mean, when you're reading a proof or constructing a proof of your own, you need to be able to do that. Is this true? Is this true? Is this true? Like, that is something, that's the kind of behavior that I want to encourage in students, right? They're given a statement, they should be able to ask themselves, is this true or false? That's exactly what I want them to do. So that's why I like it. I mean, it's also an important life skill, right? So, okay, so here's some results. So it's always good to have some data in a talk like this. The graph on the left is from a few years ago, pre-COVID, sort of normal times with these single attempt quizzes. It is somewhat correlated with exam results. Okay, correlation coefficient there, 0.49. It's not great. There's a lot of students over here that obviously didn't really engage with the quiz. I mean, if you're guessing true-false questions, you'd expect to at least get 50%. But this year it was quite nice. There's obviously also some. So the red here indicates that on average they had 1 or fewer attempts per quiz. So they weren't really engaging properly, but most students did, and they engaged, and it kind of correlated quite nicely. Okay, so this is a 0.66 correlation coefficient there with this. This is averaging over their attempts, so it's not actually their final mark. Their final mark was a bit higher because they were taking the last attempt. But if you take the average, it correlates really nicely. So that's good. So I mean, my takeaway is that this is quite a nice form of assessment. Even though it's unlimited attempts, it ended up working out really well, being a good measure of engagement and of achievement. Okay, so here's some final thoughts. So the game of assessment is to shape student behavior to maximize their success. But so the more students who go through this feedback loop, and the more times they go through it, the more they learn. And so careful feedback design. So this is what I was trying to do with this, the wording of the text that they got can foster independent learning skills. So that's the opportunity to foster these skills that, you know, you don't want to just have a surface approach. You want to make sure that they're fostering the appropriate skills. So some thoughts for how I'm going to change this in the future is change the stack, first of all, because it's easier to make changes. One of the problems with our exams is that if you want to change a question and students have already answered some of the questions in Moodle, then you can't just re-upload it. You have to go through and individually change all the variants, which is just a big pain. So, but in Stack, you can do it even when they're live, which is great. So I'm really excited about joining the cabal of Stack users. I'm also, to encourage persistence, I think I'm going to change from the last attempt counting to the highest mark. So I think some students they were getting their mark and then they're deciding, it's too risky. I think there's a certain risk if they try again and their mark might go down. And I don't want them to be discouraged. I want them to persist and try again. So I think the highest mark is a way of doing that, combined with limiting the number of attempts, maybe to like 7 or something. Negative marking for incorrect answers. So that's because the grades were inflated. So just going to remove a bit to deflate them. So. And then the other one is a 2-hour time limit. So I think there were some students who just were opening the quiz and then they weren't submitting it until like a day later. And I'm like, what are you doing? You know, we don't know what they're doing at that time. And I think just to encourage focus, put a 2 hour, they don't need anywhere near 2 hours to do the quiz anyway. But if you put a limit, it'll get them to focus. So that's my plan. So, but I mean, a bigger point here is that there's a lot of little adjustments that can be made. If you have this multiple attempts with this powerful feedback loop, then it opens up a range of adjustments that were not available before. And those adjustments can shape the student behavior in the way that you want, which is kind of an attractive prospect for educators, I guess. So that's my point. That's what I want to say. That's the end of my presentation. Thanks very much for listening. Maybe as a segue into the next talk as well, I just want to say the next speaker is from the University of Western Ontario, which is in London, Ontario, which is where I grew up. And the speaker supervisor is Dan Christensen, who was my supervisor for a summer research project 20 years ago. So that's pretty cool. And small world, I guess. So that's it. So thanks very much for your attention. I'll see you later.